Hi. Today I'd like to introduce you to my grandma and my grandpa. This is Irma Shelba and Frank Shelba. I like to call her Nana, and that's my PopPop. So, PopPop, why did your ancestors come to America?
Because my father saw no future in the area where he lived. And he and his brothers saved enough money for one passage to come to this country. And when my father came here, he worked in a box factory for a couple of years to save enough money for my uncle, his brother, and they both came over and situated in Passaic and started a business there.
Mm. Mm.
And my parents lived across the street from each other in Italy, a place called Abruzzi in the mountains. And they all knew that they would someday marry anyway. But then one at a time, well, my uncles and aunts did marry. And the first brother came over and he loved it here. And then he sent for my father and my mom. And they had one child. And they were the first ones to come. And that's how they did it. And they finally, the whole family got here. Worked out very well, and we centered in Patterson. Patterson was the dye shop area, and they were all very, very involved, and then they start buying pieces of the dye shops.
Mm-hmm.
Worked out very well, and they worked together until the Depression.
Pop, where did your ancestors settle in America?
In Passaic.
Mm-hmm. Why? For industry?
I don't know exactly why, but he did have some distant relatives there, and I assume that they came here because in those days when he came over from Europe, you had to stick together because of the language barrier and because of the customs. And that's why I believe they settled in Passaic.
We settled, I'm sorry, in Patterson because everybody lived in the Patterson area. Everybody from that area of Italy came and settled there. And because everybody spoke the same language, and we all, even the kids and the grown-ups, everybody spoke Italian. So even when I was small, I was speaking Italian until kindergarten. And then you learned in school. You just learned. Nobody said, this is how you say this. When they taught, the teachers would say, you listen, you'll pick it up. And that's how we did it.
Do you know any Italian now?
Not really well
A few
enough
words,
to.
maybe?
I did. When I was in school, I was the interpreter for everybody, which is so
That's cool.
joking now. But I will understand anything anybody tells me, ever.
So, Pop, what did you do as a kid growing up in Passaic?
Well, in those days, we made our own entertainment. There wasn't Little League like we have now.
Mm-hmm.
So our baseball was a broomstick and a tennis ball.
Nice.
And then another game we had was Steal the Flag, where you run across the street and hope you didn't have a car come while you were stealing the flag.
That's fine.
And we made our own little games up.
That's cool.
And we certainly didn't have any games, but I lived with a lot of cousins. Like I say, we had cousins on every block. And at night, everybody would go to somebody's back porch, and we'd sit on the porch and you'd play, kick the can, and hide and go seek, and things like that. There was never, ever a minute or one night that when you were alone. There was just no way. There was nothing that they had to say, this is what we're going to do tonight, because there were so many of us. There was always something to do.
So you grew up with a big family?
Big family. And even the neighbors became like family. You wouldn't call them Aunt Mary or something. They weren't your aunt or anything, but because we were living so close, backyard to backyard, it was that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. How many brothers and sisters?
Well, my mom and dad had two families. They had 2 boys and a girl, and 16 years later they had another 2 boys and a girl. So they were 2 complete families. I always said 2 mothers, 2 fathers. That's the way it was.
How many brothers and sisters?
In my family, we were 5 boys and 1 girl.
Were you the young one, or?
I was
old
the
one?
next to the last.
Next to the last?
Next to that. So I had all of the hand-me-down. I have 3 brothers older, and then there was a sister. So I got the hand-me-downs after they went through 3 bodies.
I was the youngest. And my oldest brother was 21 years older than me, and he acted as a father to me until he passed away. It was that kind of relationship.
Mhm.
But we all lived very close by, like this floor, one person, you know. In other words, in one house there would be 6 families or something. It was a very, very tight community.
All right, describe your parents.
Well, my father was a very kind gentleman who loved his family, and that was his whole life, his work and his family. My mother was extremely religious, and the Sickles went to parochial schools, and my high school experience was in a private high school with only 400 people in the whole four-year high school. And we had to play an instrument, and we had to, on Saturday evening, pray together, and that kept the family together.
Mhm. What instrument did you play, Father?
I played flute,
Mhm.
and we all had to play an instrument. My oldest brother played piano, that was in the living room. My brother Vincent played cello, that was in the sunroom. My brother Steve practiced violin in the dining room, and he hated it. So my mother would take an old tie and tie his arm to the chandelier, and he'd have to swing on it with his arm for a good hour a day, and that was it. And the only room that was left for me was the bathroom, so I'd stand in the tub and put the stand on the floor and play there. But it sounded good in the bathroom.
Good acoustics in the shower?
What was that?
Probably good acoustics in the shower.
Very good acoustics.
Mhm.
It was better than what I thought I was.
So you pursued the flute, playing the flute?
Yes, yeah. So ultimately studying, while I was in high school, I went to the New York College of Music and studied there. And wound up playing in orchestras when I was in the 7th and 8th grade. They didn't have any music in the school. It was an academic school, and there were no extracurricular activities.
Can you describe your parents? then?
Boy, I loved him. I wish I could say, JC, they were just like Pop-Pop's parents. Everybody in my house played something. All my older brothers played guitar. My father sang all the time. My mother sang all the time. Sunday was my mother and father's day. And there are, I'm talking now, 10, 15, 20 kids all the time, all around. Now, although they all were playing something, it wasn't that perfect. Remember, we were a different family. Our parents weren't that wealthy, so we could just have, 1, 2 instruments between everybody. So we really didn't do it where we went to have lessons and stuff like that. Music was always, always playing, whether it was a radio, whether the guys were playing in a group, always playing, but we never really went into it that seriously. It was just for fun. Music was fun.
Yeah. What kind of music did you guys listen to as a kid?
In those days,
Mm-hmm.
well, in those days it was a whole different ball game. You listen to the famous types of music in those days was the waltz, the foxtrot, and later on the jitterbug,
Oh boy.
and ethnic. A lot of ethnic tunes
Ethnic as in...
Italian.
from
but
Italy.
from
And different
Italy.
parts of Italy had different types of playing.
Like on Sunday was opera day from the opera in Italy. And we lived right across from a Polish church. And my mother and father would sing top of their lungs, and they would be singing in Italian. You would smell the sauce making, and the church was a Catholic church. Thank God my mother always fed the nuns and the priests because they were so happy to get the food. They never complained.
Mhm.
But Sunday was definitely Italian opera. Then we had things like the hit parade and things like that where it was only popular. And everybody knew every lyric to every song because that's what we did. That was an enjoyment thing. We used it like a fun thing.
Yeah.
And so the radio was always on. Records, but records were very expensive, so we didn't have that many. the radio was on continuously.
So music was a big form of entertainment.
Oh, absolutely. For me,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, for me.
Music and sports
Yeah.
and academics was very much expressed. We all had the six of us had to go to college. We had to go.
Mhm.
That was the aim and an objective in those days.
What about things
Mhm.
like the movies? Did you guys go to the movies?
Oh, all right. At one point in my life, my two brothers became the manager of the movie, and one took care of the movie. He would be there for usher and whatever. Now, the only thing we could go, and my brothers would say, everybody line up outside the movie, and we'd go, every one of us. I'd say maybe 10 at a time, cousins. We'd all go together because we're all the same age. And the only thing we had to pay was we had a little slip of paper and it says 4 cents for tax. And we had to give the tax. And as long as we were giving tax money, they don't say, we don't care how many people come into the movies, you can have anybody come. And we went maybe 3 times a week. And on Saturday, you'd see, you know, the rodeo show, and you'd see all the news, and you'd see 3 or 4 cartoons. So we'd stay there practically the whole day. The movies was big, 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 and we didn't have to pay for it. So that was very, very good.
Yeah, that's good. So movies, back then, I guess they weren't really movies. They were more just like short shows.
They were
No,
black and whites.
Black and whites,
Mhm.
but movies, they were really
Yeah,
stories,
but
right?
black and white.
Black and white, definitely.
What was the first thing you saw in color?
I remember. Can I say?
Go ahead.
Because I'm so excited about this. First colored movie I ever saw. We had a guest come over. Matter of fact, this woman, she had been all over. She traveled. When she came, she said, what would you like to do? And Pinocchio was playing. And that was like the first colored, it was like unbelievable. She took me to the movies, the big movies. And I saw Pinocchio. It was fantastic. Till today, I remember Pinocchio like that. It was great, great. What did you see the first one?
I don't remember. I didn't go to the movies that often
Mm-hmm.
because I was too busy
Yeah,
either working in my father's business,
That's true.
practicing, and if I had any other time, I had the boomstick and the tennis ball.
So when did you start working?
Just like you, I started in the I was 4 years old
4 years old?
when I went to the store,
What
and
sort of?
I would clean up,
Mhm.
and I got a nickel a week. And I worked my way up, and finally, when I got to high school, I got $5 a week. My lessons in New York cost $5 a week. Transportation was 87 cents by bus, and a hot dog and a Coke was 10 cents. And so I was in the hole every week. I never came out ahead.
Mhm.
One interesting thing is when I was a senior and accepted in college, my father, and I was still making $5 a week, my father said, you've been working for me and you're spoiled. I want you to go out and find a job this summer before you go away to college so you can make sure, so you can see, you know, how lucky you were. So I went to botany and I got a job with no experience for $65 an hour, $65 a week.
Mhm.
I didn't know what to do with all the money.
Good money.
I always worked, believe it or not. I was a soda jerk, you know, it's making sodas, because we had them on every block, we had soda shops. And so I would get $1 every time I was there for the night, for Saturday night. And that was when I was young, 9, 10 years old. But then I got a job for the summers where I worked in a cleaner, picking up the clothes and giving them out. And I made very good money. I was rich, $25, but I was there day and night practically. And then when I was 13, I got a job in a furniture store where people would come in and they would buy furniture on time and then pay you $10 and $15. And so I started keeping the books and taking money, which was fantastic because I had that job from 13 to maybe 17, and it was good money because I was getting paid by the hour, which the more I worked, the more money I got. And so you could always have a job, you know, and everybody would say, you want to babysit? Or if I do babysitting, then I'd say to the lady, I'll curl your hair while we're here, and I'd put her hair up, and she'd give you another $1. There was always a way to make money. And it was funny thing was I never realized I was working all the time. I was working.
Mhm.
But I never felt I had to do it, you know. But I always did. I worked all the time. But for fun.
And that must have been after the Great Depression then.
No.
No, yeah, I guess.
You were the tail end of the Depression.
Yeah.
I was in the middle of the Depression. And in the middle of the Depression, we were okay, but I remember neighbors couldn't afford delicacies like cake, and their cake was a piece of bread with sugar on it, and that was a big thing. That's the tail end of the height of the Depression.
So I guess your family didn't really have to adjust much to.
No, we were pretty well off.
Because his fathers had the shoe business, and everybody needed shoes. Nobody went out and bought new shoes. You just didn't do that, right? So you're piled up.
So everyone was coming to your house,
All the
coming
time.
to your dad's work to
Right.
repair their old shoes.
On the main street in Passaic, which was then called Lexington Avenue. It was the main street. And it was a busy time, yeah.
Could you tell me a little more about your dad's shoe shop?
Yes. First of all, he made shoes by hand in the beginning. And these women would come in, and he had stalls where you sat down and gave him the shoe, and then you'd put your foot on a piece of plain newspaper, and he had a black chalk, and he would make marks on it. And then he would come back a week later, and he would make the shoe by hand. And ultimately, he and his brother were the first men, or the first shoemen in Passaic to have machinery. And that was a big thing, because they could then repair shoes, they could put out more production and make more money. And so for the most part of it, that was toward the end of the Depression, and we lived pretty well. Later on, around World War II, when they declared shoe rationing, that was another big boom. And I remember going to school, they declared shoe rationing on a Sunday, and on a Monday morning I was on my way to school, and I usually passed the store. My father wasn't there at the time. My mother and father were in Texas seeing one of my brothers off, because my three brothers were drafted for World War II. And around the whole block were people with shopping bags, and I wondered why. What they had done, they knew they couldn't get new shoes. What they had done was go to the attic and the basement, wherever they could, and brought shoes in for repair. And so I never did get to school that day. And I remember the front of the store was 75 feet long, and all I did was tag shoes all day long, up to my hip. And what happened was that it would take months before they got their shoes back. We used to go in on Sunday and put the shades down, and people would be banging on the door to get shoes repaired. We worked from 7 to 9 at night, 7 in the morning to 9 at night on Saturday. And sometimes when it was really bad, you had to get shoes out. We'd shut the shades, but when they saw light in there, people would literally bang on the doors to get their shoes and to leave them.
Now, see, I was the end of the Depression. During the Depression, we had lost 2 houses, our homes where we lived, very pretty little houses. We lost a hotel restaurant and 2 or 3 dye shops. Now, the dye shops were the ones making all the money, and you just didn't have that anymore. People weren't dyeing things. But what happened was, we were saved by one thing. World War II came up, and they needed clothing for the soldiers. And of course, my mother was always a seamstress. She made uniforms for soldiers. She made coats for soldiers. My father lost the dye shop, but immediately went to work putting up planes. There was a place called Wright's Aeronautical, and they took all the men that were in the area, and they were making planes right from the beginning. And that saved us, because we did have money to live and everything, because there was no place you could just go get a job. There were no jobs. It was as bad as it is right now, really bad. But, you know, we were on the other end of it. Frank's family, I hate to say this, made the money because people brought in their old shoes that they did not throw away, which was a great thing for you, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, my parents, they just found new things to do, to learn how to do.
In 1932, we had a 1932 Buick, the kind with the tires on both sides, with the trunk in the back, and
That was big
the
time.
8 of us would fit in that. It would be 5 in the back, the 5 brothers in the back, 3 sitting down and 2 sitting up, and the youngest one sitting in their laps, myself and my younger brother. And in the front was my mother who drove, my father, and my sister. And we would take a vacation and go to Saratoga, and that would took, to me, eternity. Because you try sitting on somebody's lap. In those days, we didn't have the roads we have now, a lot of dirt roads. And you
How far was Saratoga from?
in those days, well, now Saratoga is about 3.5, 4 hours.
4 hours for sure.
You had to double that. You had to double, because
There
you're
were no
speeding.
roads like.
You're speeding if you're going 40, if you did. The roads couldn't take it, you know.
Now, once again, a completely different family. We never, ever, ever, ever had a car, ever. But we were so used to buses, and if we went any place, we went on the bus. And like in the summers, say, well, you know, do you go to the lake? Do you go to the beach? Yes, we'd go once to the beach because the clubs would always have, you know, buses go out, and that's how we did it. Maybe once, twice, 3 times tops. But there was always some place to go. Like every church had feast times. Every church had game time and fairs and things like that. But we didn't go away, ever.
Yeah.
We did. We would spend a month in Saratoga, and later on, we did
Lake George.
Lake George, and yeah, and then we'd go to the shore. But because my father and my uncle would alternate July and August, take me off, and so we were able to do that. That was our fun time.
All right. How about we fast forward a little bit and we talk about how you guys met?
Okay.
Very good.
I was how old? 19,
I guess so.
And you
Yeah.
were?
13.
and I was playing a concert, and she came up and asked for my autograph, and I gave it to her.
He did.
She still has it.
Really?
I couldn't believe that he would give me his autograph, but he did, and I thought it was ravishing. I went home and I told my mother, I'm going to marry. I told you, our families were always into music. There was a concert every week. My uncle did a lot of hiring, and every time Frank was home from West Point, because he was in the special services, my uncle would hire him, and I was at every concert because I would keep my cousin, who was the vocalist, I would keep her company, so I would go. And when I was 13, I saw Frank, and I told him that I know who I'm going to marry.
Really? You knew that? Right
I
at
know,
13
I
years
know,
old?
and I said, yeah, I'm sure, Mom. She said, yeah, right, okay. But he did give me his autograph, which I thought was very nice.
So when did you guys start dating?
Well, time lapsed. I got out of high school when I was 16 because we didn't have kindergarten in a parochial school. And then when I graduated high school and applied to college, there were no schools in New Jersey with a music major in education. The closest school was in Westchester, Pennsylvania. I applied there, and I was really lucky to get in because at that time all of the World War II veterans were being discharged, and they were all applying to colleges, and they were preferred. And just by luck, I guess, I was accepted at the college. And they didn't have any room in the dorm. And so the best thing I could find for me was a home about a mile away, a farmhouse. And it was an interesting place because I'm 17, and we went into the house and spoke to the woman, and the husband made it known that he didn't want any college people in his house, That's how I started with it. And he said he's only doing it because his wife, who happened to be very sick, and we didn't know that at the time, wanted to do something good for humanity. And if I didn't get that, I wouldn't have been able to go to college. So a fellow by the name of Bill Rumble and I were housed in the attic. And to tell you how cold it was, I had a quart of milk that froze solid one time. And I did that for about a year till I could get housing closer to the college.
Mhm.
But it was not a happy time. But I had to compete with men who were married, men who were older than I. And so when we went to gym, they scheduled men for gym, and they said, look, we went through the war. What are we going to do playing volleyball? So that if you were in the Army, you got credit. The two of us who were in the freshman class, they didn't know what to do with us, and yet we had to take gym. So we wound up in gym with girls. And that was odd.
Mm.
And then the sophomores and juniors wanted to initiate the freshmen. Now the freshmen were older than the sophomores and juniors. And so they wanted the freshmen, who were all veterans, and the two of us who were not, to wear a beanie hat and go pray in front of an apple tree and some silly things like that. And that lasted about 8 minutes because the veterans got together and said, I hate to say what they said.
Getting back to getting with Frank and me,
Yeah.
when I was 17, again, see, we do everything music-wise. My uncle had a big musical dinner, and all the musicians from the area, from Patterson, like if you were a musician, you came to this dinner. And I was 17, and naturally sitting at my uncle's table, and Frank came over and he said, aren't you that little girl who asked me for my autograph? And I said, yes, I am. And he said, would you like to see me sometime?
I thought that was very nice of me.
I thought it was big of you too. I said, okay, sounds good to me. And that was on a Monday, and now I'm 17. I just turned 17. I've got a really bang-up job at the Atomic Energy Commission. In New York, I was working. God knows how my mother and father would let me go to New York. But anyway, I had this job, and I saw him on a Monday night. He wrote me a letter on Tuesday. I went out with him on Wednesday, and he said, would you believe it that we're going to be married someday? This is my third time I saw you, right, to talk to you. I said, yeah, I can see it. I see it very surely. Romantic or what?
Yeah.
It wasn't romantic. At the time, I thought, boy, this is a dull way to get together. But it worked out very nicely.
So did you guys go on dates after?
Well,
yeah, anytime he was home.
at the time, we were going steady. When
Right
I was in the
from then,
Army,
Frank.
I was stationed at West Point, and I would come home and we'd go
Uncle
out.
Louis would
with-
hire you every time.
Yeah, but I would play a job at home, but I would go out with Irma and her
My
mother.
mother.
And actually, I courted Irma and her mother, and I loved her so much because
And my parents absolutely adored him. Number one, they loved him because my Uncle Louis, who was like kind of a big guy, because he gave a lot of jobs out.
he was
and
an
stuff.
official in the Union.
Yeah, and he kept saying to my father, do you know what kind of guy this is? You know what he's going to make when he gets out of school, ba-da-ba. Because he hired him for everything. If he had a job, Uncle Frank got the job. Isn't that true? It was great. And so we really, I guess from then on,
But you didn't mind having her mom tag
Oh,
along
no,
on dates?
no.
my mother
Because
was
she
so
paid for the
good.
refreshments.
She paid for everything.
We had a collection of about 200 Dairy Queen spoons.
Because
Dairy
that's where we
Queen.
went for Dairy Queen.
Dairy Queen?
Oh, yeah, no, she was a doll.
No, my mother was very special.
It
And
was a
she loved
different-
Frank, I think, I would almost say more than his own mother loved him. My mother would just die anytime he came home. Well, where's Frank? Where's Frank? But it was a very nice, calm, quiet going out time. And when he was home, he worked first because you had to get the job. Uncle Louis had to get the job in. Frank's got to work. And then I'd see him.
Alright, so what's your favorite memory from your wedding day?
Oh, God, the wedding was a wild, wild,
First of all,
wild
your
thing.
mother made a dress, and the church.
Oh, the church was wonderful because he's from West Point. All the ushers were ushers up for us,
They had uniform.
and they all had uniforms. You know, they all wore a cadet kind of uniform. It seemed same uniform with a collar, and they all were my ushers. Now they came to be ushers, and they got all these instruments along the outside of the mass, and we didn't see them. We didn't know there were instruments there. And that's when, at the end of the mass, now the priest is going nuts. He doesn't know why they're all in uniform, number one. It was a high mass. I was the president of the choir, so the full choir, 24 people are singing. And all of a sudden, they take out their instruments from the rows, and they start playing the President's March. Nobody plays the President's March, right? And all of a sudden, they say, da 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 da, pom. You know, and we had
Truffles and flourishes.
Yeah, flourishes, we had trombones, we had trumpets, we had everything. And the priest runs up the aisle and he's screaming, I think this is a sin. I think this is a sin. And we had these beautiful men all in uniform. Oh, God. And the priest is screaming. But it was wonderful. It was, I never had so much fun at a wedding. And usually bride and groom don't have a good time. His family were all nuts. They were all there. Every single person was there from all over the United States. And it was an unbelievable wedding. Really, really great.
They weren't quite nuts.
Well, your family's kind of
They
nuts.
just liked a lot of fun.
Somebody yelled, what's their favorite song? Now, we always had music, but we didn't have a song. We never had a song. And somebody yelled, Tenderly. All of a sudden, Tenderly became our favorite song. We didn't even know about it, but these ushers, they all had something to say about the wedding. Beautiful wedding. Beautiful, beautiful wedding.
After you got married, where did you guys settle in?
We settled in with her parents. They had a two-family home, and we lived there for a few years. And at that time, I was working on my master's, and I was teaching and playing professionally. And we then had one child.
And then we had David right away, and then we had Paul right away, and then we had Carol.
But in that interim, we moved to Elmwood Park.
Right.
We needed more housing. We beautiful home in Elmwood Park. And we were there for 34 years. And our children grew up in that town.
And when our children, the three of them were in school, and like they're just 3 years apart, so that they were all together. My principal, I was always in school. I was either the library lady or the, class mother head or something. He said to me, "Why don't you go back to school? Why don't you go to school to be a teacher?" He said, "Because I'd hire you tomorrow." Because I was doing a lot of substituting for special class teachers. They could never get anybody, so I would go in if he was stuck. And Frank had been saying all this time, "Why don't you go to school? You're always in school anyway." And finally I said, "Okay, I'll just go and I'll just check it out." And I did. I checked it out, and I really loved going to school. And I finished college, 3.5 years nights, and I had the principal hire me immediately for the job, and I loved teaching. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. And since Frank was always a teacher, and he started going into guidance.
How long did you teach?
40 years.
40 years.
40 years. And during that time, I went on, got beyond my master's, and ultimately taught for 15 years at, it was then called Jersey City State, and I taught music economics there, and played professionally all the time, and was lucky enough to play concert music as well as club dates and as well as shows. And so I got to meet people like Jack Benny and Bill Crosby and
Everybody.
Phyllis Diller and all the, in that era, in the era of 30, 40 years ago. And that was a big kick. And then the shows were fun.
What shows?
I did Broadway shows And there was a theater in the Garden State Plaza. It was
Still
called the
there.
Bergamo Theater. And we did shows there for a month at a time. And who was the,
In Corio?
no, the director of the manager?
Oh, Robert Ludlum,
Robert Ludlum, who's
director there too.
a great writer,
Writer.
was the manager of the show, of the theater. And one interesting thing, it was a small theater, and I counted one time there were 666 seats. And he said, no, there aren't. There are 669 seats. There are 3 folding chairs in the back. And I said, why? He said, because a lot of people are superstitious about 666. And they wouldn't come into a theater that was
Unless you had those
666.
chairs.
So when they would give, tell me about that, I would explain to them there are not that many chairs. I mean, there are more, 3 in the back.
What's the significance of 666?
It has,
It has something to do with demons and Satan or
that's a
something.
good question. What is, I really don't know, I just know 666
But
means the
Robert
devil.
Ludlum turned out, like he kept saying, I want to write, I want to write. He turned out to be such an unbelievable writer. Like he did all the Bournes.
He's had a lot of bestsellers.
Sellers. And then, he passed away very, very young, but he was wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. They're still playing his movies all over, really great.
Mhm.
But he worked with Tom Jones and all the big stars. He played with Soupy Sales, and we went all over because every place he would go, I'd bring the kids. And we went one time, my 3 kids, we went and sat in the front row of this Bergamo Theater, and it was snowing, and it was a blizzard, so they wanted to close the theater. And they couldn't because they said, we can't do it because we've sold 5 seats. And unfortunately,
Wow.
we had bought the 5 seats. And we go to sit in there, and they're all mad at us, looking at us. Why are you here? And I said, because we bought seats. And they had to put on that performance. It was so great, because then Frank met the boy who played the show was, so you want to buy a horse, what was that?
Cowboy and the Tiger.
The Cowboy and the Tiger. And Frank hires that boy who was the
Years
star years later. And Paulie, my son, was playing drums. And
It's about 20 years later.
And he starts singing the song. And the boy came up and he said, you're singing my song. And Paulie said, I was just wondering, did you remember that song? He said, I didn't remember one word. And here Paulie is singing this boy's song that that day he had sung. It was really, those are special times when you met people. Very nice.
Later on, in '68, I played with the Jersey Symphony and opened up the garden. It was called the Garden Arts Center now. Now it's called.
I don't know what it is now.
Mm.
But you soloed with Roberta Peters there.
Yeah, there a couple times.
Marvelous, gorgeous, gorgeous opera singer. And Frank was soloing with her. And what a thrill that is, to see him up front playing. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful.
Combined, you two nearly have 70 years of experience in teaching. How do you think teaching back then differs from today?
Like I said before, I think teaching is the greatest thing that ever happened to me. Teaching is unbelievable. You have an association with kids, the best in the world. Today it's different because I don't feel that there's enough respect to teachers. I think they should deserve so much more. I don't want to hear parents come to school and talking against the teachers in front of them. That's a terrible thing. Teaching is too good for that.
Education has changed dramatically since the computer. In the early days, a big thing was writing, script writing, and printing. And you did math through your head and writing. And your research, you went to the library and looked at the cards, the Dewey Decimal System, and you had to find the book in the stack, you had to find the page, you had to read it. And today, you just take your iPod and you get all that information in a second. And so the student today is learning a lot more in a shorter time, and they're advancing much more than what we did in those days.
So technology is really helping
Oh,
students progress.
fantastic.
Oh,
It's changed
absolutely. It's
education.
changed education.
And year to year, it has changed. And it's difficult for teachers to keep up because they have to constantly go back to school and learn new techniques. They have workshops, schools
They have to
sponsor
do
workshops
things, absolutely.
so that people can keep up with the technology. When Irma was in school, they put one computer in her class,
We all
talked to her for a
shared it.
few hours,
And I had to teach it.
and, you know, that was
Now
very
you have to
primitive.
go, you have to go to school, you must go, and you've got to learn all new things.
Now, if you're 3 or 4 years old, you're starting on a computer. And so, not only does the student learn more earlier, the teacher has to
Everybody.
keep up,
Yeah.
and that's rough.
And the children are, oh God, they learn so fast. They learn so much faster than the older people. Really, super, super what you could learn. But you're missing something. You miss that closeness with your teacher. I just don't see it today the way I saw it when I started teaching. I couldn't believe how people treated you. They treated you so beautifully. And maybe it's because I always treated teachers that way because my children's teachers were the best. And if you treat them nice, boy, they'll treat you like gold. Oh,
I can
loved
remember
it.
walking in her class one time, and this young girl, she was sitting on the floor next to her, holding the hem of her dress, and with the other hand sucking her thumb. And you had time in those days to have some compassion.
Yeah,
And
just say by me. If you don't feel well, all right, stay by me a minute. Because, you know, kids need some loving. I don't care what anybody says. Nowadays, they say, don't put your arms, God forbid, because I started in kindergarten. And they go, don't give them too much, you know, love and affection. No, 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 don't do that. Well, there's sometimes when somebody needs it. And that little girl was hurting so badly. And it took us a long time to find out how badly she was being treated. And then we were able to help her. You can't help her if you don't know what's wrong.
So you taught mainly younger kids?
Oh, I went all the way to 6th grade, but I like the younger kids. I started young, and I guess maybe over 25 years or in 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade. I love the classes.
I see you holding your yearbook. Tell me a little bit about your high school days.
Well, they were great, and I still see all of my friends from high school. I work on our reunion committee, and we get together maybe 4, 5, 6 times a year. We even go out for pizzas some nights, and anybody can come. We've now been out of high school 60 years, but we still get together. We have a marvelous time. It's still very, very good to see everybody. That's very, very special when you get to see everybody.
Keeping friends for a long time.
A long time. These are people I went to grade school with. I went to Eastside High School with. They're really great, great people. I still work on the committee all the time.
Pop, you have your yearbook too?
I have my yearbooks, but my high school wasn't as pleasant as Irma's.
Mhm.
As I said before, there were only 400 in the high school, 100 at each grade level, highly academic. And I had to go to New York to get my lessons twice a week. And we were at war at that time. And so any extra time I had to work in my father's business.
Mhm.
And really I didn't have much social time in high school.
Tell me about some of the presidents through your lifetime.
I can remember famous things that happened with certain presidents. I remember Roosevelt during the end of the Depression, and I remember he was president when we had Pearl Harbor and went to World War II in Europe.
Mhm.
I can remember Harry Truman recalling General Eisenhower. General Eisenhower at that time in the Philippines wanted to take the troops and all the way to China and extend the war. And President Truman recalled him. And essentially fired him from that position.
Mhm.
And the surrender of the Japanese was taken aboard a certain ship. And I can remember the picture of that where the Japanese with top hats came and sat at a table, and General Eisenhower explained that we had won, they had lost, and so on. In his 10-minute speech to them and accepting their surrender, never once did he mention Harry Truman, his president, his boss.
Mhm.
And the reason being, he was miffed by the fact that Harry Truman recalled him and told him, stop, we want to end this war. Another famous one for me was Eisenhower. He's responsible for our interstate Route 80, which goes from east to west. And an interesting thing about Route 80 is every so many miles, there is a widening extension of the highway.
Mhm.
In the event that a plane should be in a problem and have to land, they would be able to land safely. And it's been used a number of times.
Hmm.
Okay.
How about you, Nan? Who is your favorite president?
Well, I had a lot, but I have to say I started with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was president when I was, little. And I thought he was the greatest man in the world because my parents and everybody at that time thought so highly of him. We didn't even know that he was crippled at the time because it was never put in the paper, it wasn't on television. We didn't know how sick he was. He was really a very, very, very sick man. But he was a great, great president. And then Harry Truman came up. He was not grandiose. He was just a plain guy, a great, great man. And so I started reading about him. And he was such a real person. You never thought of him like being gorgeous like John Kennedy or anything like that. But he was a wonderful, wonderful man. And he thought nobody liked him. And because nobody came to seem to say goodbye, I'm going to start to cry. Every time I think about this, I cry because I was reading about him and he went to the station thinking that nobody liked him. And he gets to the station and everybody is there. And he just looked around and he said, who are these people? And they said, we're all your people. And he never even realized that he was such a great, great man. And he was a great, great man. And he was very, very good. And I wish just sometimes people would learn a little bit about him. He was so good. Of course, you have people like, I thought we'd never live without Eisenhower, without Kennedy. And we had to live without Kennedy. It was very, very sad too. Sorry he had to go so fast. I just wish that more people would now say, this is our president. And when they're talking about Barack Obama, I want people to remember, he's our president. And I think that people don't respect as much as they should. This is our president. Regardless whether he's white, pink, or purple, this is our president. And I do think the world of him, and I'm disgraced by the people who openly talk about him because he is our president.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to view Barack Obama positively.
Absolutely honor him because he is the man who was voted in as president. You have to give him a chance, like they did to Harry Truman. What do you think, Frank?
I think our mores has changed, and there should be respect for the position.
Absolutely.
Regardless of whether you like him or not, or vote for him or not, the position should be respected. And when they disrespect the position, they disrespect themselves. And this goes
And their country.
all the way up to Congress, where someone could yell out to the president, "You lie."
That's unheard of.
Another thing.
That's unheard of.
It isn't a question of whether I like him or don't like him or think he's effective or not effective. I'm thinking of the position. And to yell out with full Congress, "You lie," is totally disrespectful and not acceptable.
Not acceptable at all.
Do you remember what you were doing during JFK's assassination?
In the afternoon, I was coming home from work. I heard it on the car radio. And when I came up Elmwood Drive, Mom was on the front porch crying. because it was such a traumatic experience.
How did it affect America?
We were all dumbfounded at first. It was so bad. It was so bad that the televisions couldn't be on because everybody was crying. Up and down the street, the neighbors all came out. They all talked. And they all said, what are we going to do? And everybody said, don't worry, Lyndon Johnson will be fine. But it was so bad that every one of us, we were in such a shock. We thought, well, how are we going to go on without our president? It was a shock, a very, very, very big shock.
All right, I have one final question for both of you. What accomplishment are you most proud of?
I want to go. I'm most proud of my family. I'm just so glad that I have my family. I love each and every one, especially because I brought them up. I'm not ashamed of them at any time. They've never done anything where I would be ashamed of, where I see them talking badly to somebody. Frank and I think we did a pretty good job, and my family is what I'm most proud of. And my grandson, Jason, was...
I would say the same thing, without crying. But I'm most proud of her accomplishment in that she had 3 children and then went to school nights and then got her master's and had 3 wonderful children.
And honey, I love you too.
What's that?
I love you too, honey.
Right.
What about you, Pop?
I concur with Nana. The best thing I ever did was to marry her. And after that, our 3 children who were successful.
That's right.
And after
And our
that,
grandson, our
After that-
son-in-laws.
our grandchildren
Oh, I love them.
were very good. And our
And our
great-grandchildren.
great-grandchildren.
We're very
Many.
fortunate, we're very blessed to have the life that we've had.
And so proud of
we're
everybody.
proud of everybody,
Yes. I want to say especially Jason.
especially you.
Thank you very much. I'm very fortunate to have you guys.
Me too, Ryan.
Thank you very much for all your cooperation and